I'm Brennan Kendra. In the world of corporate power, who really calls the shots? Is it the CEO, the visionary, the executor, the public face? Or is it the board of directors, the unseen overseers who hold the keys to the castle? Today we dive deep into this complex dynamic, boardroom versus corner office, inside the executive power struggle. Henry Fayol, a pioneer in management theory, laid the framework for administrative governance over a century ago. His principles explain how these power dynamics operate successfully in organizations through centralization, scalar chain, and unity of command, shaping how organizations would operate for decades. In the system, centralization keeps decision-making at the top, and scalar chain ensures authority flows downward, clearly and predictably. Seen in the coming examples of Apple and Facebook, the board of directors takes full advantage of the scalar chain authority, sitting even above the CEO and CFO. However, the CEO is still capable of leveraging their necessity due to their more down-to-earth understanding of the business they run and the stakeholders they interact with, compared to the board of directors who lack that first-hand experience. Unity of command explains that every worker reports to only one boss, no confusion, no contradiction. But in modern companies, that one boss isn't always the CEO, rather a group of board of directors. Legally empowered by shareholders, they have final say over hiring, strategy, and yes, even firing the CEO. This begs the question, what happens when the CEO isn't the one in control, and how do they maintain their sense of authority when working with the board of directors, or even disagreeing with them? Apple's board fired its co-founder, Steve Jobs. Interestingly though, Jobs, the co-founder, wasn't the CEO of Apple at the time of his firing. John Sculley, whom Steve appointed, was the acting CEO, and he agreed with the board in taking Jobs out of the equation. Jobs was known for his stubborn, bold decisions, refusing to align his vision with Sculley and the board, and after making a continued failed investment into the Macintosh computer, the board decided enough was enough, and Jobs was continuously putting the board's patience to the test, operating outside the scalar chain authority principle and refusing to be put down another direction other than his own. Jobs often acted as if his word was the final one, ignoring the CEO that he put in place, along with the board of directors.
What can I say? I hired the wrong guy.
That was Sculley?
Yeah. And he destroyed everything I'd spent 10 years working for. Starting with me, but that wasn't the saddest part.
Steve Jobs, Apple's visionary leader, clashed with then CEO John Sculley, and the board sided with Sculley and Jobs was out. Fayol's unity of command broken down, these two leaders with competing visions. The board enforced centralization through Sculley, not Jobs, but 12 years later, with Apple on the brink of collapse, they brought Jobs back. Why? Because of results, charisma, and innovation, and how that can overpower hierarchy. His successes with Pixar could not be ignored, and the board of directors began to regret their decision as a result. In the academic peer-reviewed article by Tuggle et al., their study shows that narcissistic CEOs, those who dominate attention and steer emotional tone, often sway boards to take more risky, bold action. Jobs was a perfect fit for that mold. And with time, the board needed those risks as playing it safe was tanking the mecha company. Jobs was notorious for taking those gigantic risks, being difficult to work with in his uncompromising passion. This interesting dynamic shows how his narcissistic behaviors got him fired, but then rehired, eventually taking Apple into the stratosphere with the invention of the iPhone just a couple years later. Steve Jobs and his neglect towards the unity of command and Fayol's principles proved to be his biggest ally, yet his biggest liability, often clashing with those above him. Even though he was undeniably successful and innovative, proving his necessity towards Apple. These unique qualities of Jobs gave him unparalleled leverage to operate outside of the typical hierarchy Fayol lays out, and assert his dominance over the board of directors. In the 1950s, the McDonald brothers had a brilliant system. the speedy service system known as fast food. But they didn't really want a global empire. Enter Ray Kroc, an ambitious milkshake machine salesman who saw the brand's potential immediately. Ray Kroc is known for this quote, "If I saw a competitor drowning, I'd shove a hose right in his mouth." This pretty much sums up Kroc's vision as CEO, a ruthless one. The brothers wanted control. Kroc wanted domination. Fayaux's scalar chain was muddied in this dynamic. Who really had command? The franchise visionary or the original owners? Franchises were much more rare at that time in the 1950s, causing a lack of hierarchical separation between the brothers and Kroc. While the brothers thought they knew who was in charge, being themselves, the law wasn't as prepared to back them up as it is today. And Kroc, he was just too hungry to be contained. Eventually, Kroc created a parallel organization known as a real estate company and forced the brothers out by leveraging financial agreements over the franchises that were built on lots. This was a classic case of violating unity of command, conflicting directions from multiple leaders, leading to an organizational chaos situation, primarily because of the early developments in what franchises' legal parameters were, being such a new concept in America. This lack of understanding behind how franchises operate gave Kroc the advantage over those who were in charge. And once Kroc had central control, he enforced Fayaux's principles with an iron fist. Uniform menus, rigid operations, total top-down oversight, learning from his own actions and ensuring no one could do the same thing that he did to the McDonald brothers. McDonald's today embodies CEO centralization, but this was all born out of conflict. Let's fast forward to the 2000s, where a dorm room idea exploded into a social media empire. At its core were Mark Zuckerberg, Eduardo Saverin, and later Sean Parker. Saverin was CFO, but Zuckerberg, relentlessly focused, sidelined him and slowly took away his power over time. Saverin, in an interview by Forbes in 2012, had this to say about Zuckerberg. "Much of what people say about him is nothing but Hollywood fantasy. Behind the scenes, Zuckerberg diluted Saverin's shares. The board, they followed its founder. This is where agency theory clashed with Fayaux's classical models. According to Krause et al. In 2017 in an academic peer-reviewed article, combining CEO and board chair roles, known as CEO duality, can give executives enormous unchecked power. Zuckerberg had that duality early on. The board, young and loyal, offered little resistance and much trust in their visionary and leader, Zuckerberg. Tuggle's attention-based model shows us how more narcissistic CEOs manipulate the organizational cultures and board actions, steering decisions in their favor. This is done through charisma, confidence, or even soft influence. Sean Parker perfectly explains how charisma can be all that it takes to get your hands on the steering wheel of a gigantic company. After meeting Zuckerberg in 2004, he was placed as the company's first president in its early days. However, his contributions were not that of technological genius like Saverin or Zuckerberg. Rather, they were reckless and destructive, having to leave Facebook just 1 year later in 2005. His only contribution? Dropping the in Facebook. This was related to many controversies, including drug possession, privacy invasion. Sean Parker, jumping on Facebook, tells us Zuckerberg likely was able to control the emotional tone just as Jobs, just as Kroc, pushing out Saverin and steering the board of directors' motivation. Sean Parker also shows how Zuckerberg might have fallen victim to the same emotional manipulation, opting for the cool, popular guy rather than the right one. Saverin might have proved his wrongdoing in court, receiving a settlement after his legal action, but this was still his defeat. The board didn't change its direction with Zuckerberg, and Saverin was never reinstated. Who's really on top? The truth is, within this balancing act, there's not really an easy, simple, or even consistent answer. Jobs lost, but then he won. The McDonald brothers, they were completely overrun. And Saverin was written out by the cool popular kid who had no idea what he was doing. Yet Savrin was able to prove his successes elsewhere, becoming a multi-billionaire. Modern governance is always going to be a tug of war. It's charisma versus control, vision versus accountability, centralization versus oversight. In truth, no one's fully on top. The CEO and the board of directors, they need each other, but only when their vision is aligned in power. And when they're not, well, history tells us exactly what happens.